Hi Nader, hi Lorena, hi Josep, and hello to everybody else that has joined us. This is the Q&A portion of the lecture. And I believe we are clear to begin. Lorena, would you like to add any thoughts or notes before we start?
Sure, I just first of all want to thank you all for being here. Josep Ferrando for being our first virtual lecturer. I mean, he's quite physical, but we didn't have like the pleasure to have him in person at Cooper Union, and I hope he can visit us in the near future. But I'm really thankful because he was willing to test out this new format, and this is going to be kind of like the first experiment, and we are planning to have many other virtual lectures. We want to keep almost the same events that we had planned for the spring semester. Yeah, I'm very excited about being able to bring everybody together to have this conversation. And thank you also, Ben, for being the respondent and to facilitate the Q&A with Josep.
It's my pleasure. Let me just first of all do a sound check. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me okay. Do I sound okay to you? Can you hear me, Josep?
Yes, I think that I'm listening you really well. So it's I hope it's everybody's listening me a good way.
Yep.
Okay. We can hear you. Great. Well, this is thank you for the thumbs up from the audience.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, so I'm going to start with just a comment. I thought it was a great lecture, and it was actually very nice to see it live, and also in its. I revisited moments of it in its live stream, and I realized that there's quite a tight structure to the talk, and I wanted to really dig in and ask you very pointedly about the three issues that go through all the 9 projects. And the 3 issues, just to remind everybody, were monomateriality, geometry, and efficiency. And the first one, monomateriality, it strikes me that it's always difficult in architecture to create something so pure. And so in a lot of your projects, they offer themselves as these monomaterial structures, but very quickly we realize that there are other materials involved. And I want to embrace it as a kind of as a sort of making the idea of monomateriality more rich. And the question is really specifically, I realized in the project of the house in a house, which is essentially a kind of wood structure encased in concrete, for the house in between 2 fireplaces, which is a concrete structure within a brick structure. There's a building inside of a building, which is a steel structure inside of another different kind of industrial steel structure. It seems like in a lot of your projects, there's actually this kind of nested materiality, or there's this material duality. And the duality is very important to kind of experience the material richness of each project. But I wanted to zoom in on your on these constructs that you've set up and asks you to respond to the idea that maybe monomateriality is almost an impossible pursuit, but what it gives you is this are these really rich contradictions and relationships.
No, thank you very much, Ben, and thanks again to Nader and Lorena for this invitation. No, I repeat what I was saying at the beginning, that it's a great honor for me to be in that school. And I think that it is a very good question to begin. So I think that sometimes some of the lectures that I give are, the title sometimes is Embedded Rhythms. And it's more or less related to this, what you were talking about. No? So even when I was talking about this project in Construmat, this kind of installation for 3 days, is a space inside another space. So this kind of a common space is related to the structure of the more common space, which is the fair building. No? But even in this house in a house, so always when I'm trying to talk about monomateriality, and sometimes appears to materials, is even to talk about this kind of duality, no? To reinforce some of the characteristics of both. For example, in the house in a house is a process of understanding how you're going deeper to the domesticity or to the warmer spaces. No? So you're going from the street to the bed. And the idea is that you can understand that the facade has different layers, but is one next to the other, or you can understand that if a facade is a layer next to the other and to the other, but with a distance in between that you can inhabit. And that was more or less the intention of that place, in order to understand that there is a gradient of comfortability. So instead of having all the layers together and you have inside and outside comfort conditions, what happens in the house in a house is that you have a certain conditions when you are in between the ceramic layer of the existing house to the concrete prefab layer. Okay, because instead of adding isolation, what I'm doing is that this is a space that like air space that makes some kind of comfortability, but in between the concrete and the wood areas, there's another one. And when you're inside the wood is the place you have to say less dress, no? It's the space that you are going to sleep, for example. So the idea is that when you are taking out dress, layers that you are dressing, is the place that where the house has more layers. And you're going from more like a urban material, like in that case is brick, concrete prefab pieces to the wood. But at the same time, even how you work with these materials, for example, the concrete pieces are done like attaching and stacking all of them. Even they are stacked, provoking some kind of bigger or wider joint on the horizontal lines in order to perceive that this is wider. Okay, and the vertical ones are like more or less attached. No? While when you are in the wood areas, this continues without joints. No, in order to understand that it seems bigger. No, so or it seems that this is like an envelope of you. No. So even how they are attached, the materials are attached, or they're continuous or discontinuous, or homogeneous or fragmented. They're trying to explain something in that way. Even in the house in the building, inside the building that you were talking about in Mendoza, it's again the same. So we're using the existing building as a shield skin to the new one. No? But at the same time, the space in between became not only like a shield, it's at the same time is some kind of a vertical garden that relates to the relation system of the city. No? So it's like if you are growing up with the same system. So the idea is that instead of understanding that when you are inside the building, for me, there are two concepts that are really important. No? The one is the idea of embedded rhythms. So how you put the new rhythms are related to the existing ones and related to the things that will be inside. And the second thing is that it's an opportunity to understand that a facade that is always made of layers could be layers that are separated in order to provide some kind of a space inside the walls, inside the facades. And then it's when appears the duality, no? Because it's to make contrast, no? To show the contrast that you are in between layers, facade layers.
Yeah, I mean, I react to this duality that happens in a lot of your projects, and I think this idea of embedded rhythms really answers to that. And I have to say, I think, you know, I mean, I should say as a comment, it's not a question, but as a comment, I find I'm always quite impressed, you know, and I really enjoy these talks when an architect has an idea and it fulfills itself in such different ways for each project. So, you know, a lot of your projects are quite distinct from each other, and it's not just the context that they're in or the program. It seems that you're really challenging yourself on each one, and you know, especially the last one. I think the casino project, which is this kind of you know, scaffolding inside of a ruin. It's almost it seems it's such a shame that that's not getting built. But it seems to be this kind of culmination of this idea of embedded rhythms. Well, my second question, because there was such a variety of work, I was so interested in maybe some accidental consistencies on your part, and I wanted to put you on the spot and see if this makes any sense. But you seem to have an obsession with geometry and certain kinds of geometry, and I want to simplify this and say that you're interested in the number 3. Now, the reason I say that is because as I was taking notes on your lecture, this is kind of what the notes look like, and you know, it has your three ideas and the 9 different locations. And I realized as I was taking notes that I was also drawing one of your buildings. It just looked like the facade of this university building in Buenos Aires, which has this tripartite structure. And then I was like, wait, so the number 3 actually occurs many times. It occurs in the Buenos Aires project. It occurs in the Barcelona pavilion, in the installation in Barcelona with the wooden sticks. Basically, there's in 3 directions this little device, X, Y, and Z. It occurs in the house in Ocho Quebradas, which is this 9-grid house, but it's basically a 3x3 squares to produce this house for anybody, as you call it. And it seemed to me that there's this power of 3 that you introduce into various projects. I also read it in the gate for Ocho Quebradas, but the number 8 seems to mess up that theory of mine, because the number 8 comes up many times in that project and in other projects. There's 8,000 pieces of wood. Then there's 800 pieces of wood in another project. There's another project that has 8 different lines that makes it. And so you seem to have these obsessions, but you don't talk about them specifically. And I wanted to talk about them specifically because for some architects, and this is what I would want to know if I was a student. I'd be curious about this. How do you start there, or how do you end up with that? And why do these things, why are they so consistent in your work?
Oh, I very like that question. Is that because well, let me see that, and then as I resume, we have the number 2, that is duality. Number 3, number 3, that is the one that is related, is the minimum number to provide to understand that this is a series. This is a series, so it's systematic in some way, because you you have it's as important the numbers as the space in between. No? So it's like a series. That's why it's important. And number 8 because it's the infinite. It's the infinite system. But the duality, only to go deeper, I have to say that to confess that I have a twin sister. So I've been 47 years in my life with a duality. So it's common for me to have dualities. But in fact, for me, that it's true that the number 3, it's really important because the number 3 is able to provide or to talk about asymmetry and symmetry at the same time. It's the first number, as I said, that it provides the idea of series. So you have repetition. And number 8 as the infinite, no? But is it true that all the projects are related to some kind of rules, no? So, and as you said, all the projects, they have some kind of, so in some of the projects, I try to invent some kind of game that, but later when I'm doing the project, for me, what I'm doing the project is like playing the game in order to find the rules that diffuse the rules, in order that exceptions become the rules instead of becoming exceptions. And then is when appear some other or numbers or there are some tricks, for example, in the Buenos Aires, not that is 1, 2, 3, like it's tripartito, but it's divided in 1, 3, 2. So in horizontal is 1, 2, 3 floors, but the columns are 1, 3, 2. No, so they're inverted some of the numbers. So in that way, is that this idea about that, as I was saying, that so there are some of the rules that normally the geometrical or the mathematical rules are becoming to the place, but are in both directions. This is what I said in the Construmat installation. So the trusses are hanging from the existing structure. So depending on the rhythm of the space, but at the same time, they depend on the rhythm of the rolls dimension, that is 2 meters, so every 4 meters, but at the same time related to the other ones. So in that way, there always is some kind of numbers that are always related, or rules, as I said, rules of the game that later I try to play against me. It's like to play against me in order to become, as I said at the beginning of the lecture, rigorous instead of rigid. And this is what I try in all the projects. It's like to play against or with me, depending in the moment of the project. At the beginning is against, and at the end is with. And there's another thing that happens in this kind of things, like the 3x3, or even some of the projects that I don't show, is the idea of labyrinth, but labyrinth because the repetition of non-defined spaces. For example, in Barcelona, that happens in the enlargement, in the ensanche, that a lot of people, when appears in Barcelona or go up from the subway, they feel without orientation because almost all the blocks are equal. And this kind of labyrinth that is more related to the idea of non-orientation because repetition, instead of non-orientation because this kind of formal French labyrinth that is more like a shortcuts or whatever. I'm more interested in the other ones. Is that in the way that you're like losing in some ways the orientation, and that happens, for example, in the 8+1 house in Ocho Quebradas or these kind of things. And again, this idea about non-orientation or labyrinth for me is more related to the number 8 because it's more or less the infinite.
Wow, that is really interesting. I mean, let's get into that. So I wasn't planning to ask this question, but I will now that you bring up this this issue of the labyrinth and non-orientation. But I was, after your lecture, I went back to some of your previous work and some projects that you did. There seemed to be this movement over the last 10 years in your practice from highly specific geometries to more universal geometries. And I was going to ask this question of why was there this movement towards more systematic and universal orthogonal systems versus more specific non-orthogonal and site-based geometries. And you didn't show that previous work because I realize now that the answer is that there's this project towards disorientation or non-orientation, and that in a sort of surprising twist, it's actually these more universal, orthogonal, and discrete or subdivided systems that provide this ability to get lost that you're looking for. So it seems like you're trying to use geometry as a way of getting lost, and this is not really a question, but more of a provided the answer for a question that I wasn't going to ask, but now I realize maybe was the most interesting question that I should have asked.
No, I think that in some way, sometimes more than sometimes that to disorientate the people is that they find their own orientation. No? For example, in the house 8+1, it was an opportunity to do that because it was a house without a place and without location, exactly location, and without a certain client. No? And then it was the way of designing a house that should be as generic as possible to be as specific as possible as the client would be. So the idea is that it's not like to have like, okay, you have a loft and everybody can put the furniture where they want. No, it's like, it's in order to prepare a game in order that any family could decide how to live there, but with some kind of rules, no, that you put there. So it's in terms of non-orientation, in terms of that everybody finds its own way.
I think that's so it's so interesting. And also, I mean, the other tendency in the work, I mean, I'm not too sure how to articulate this, but you're in Spain, you practice out of Barcelona, but it seems like a lot of your work is international, at least just from this lecture, and that there were, out of 9 projects, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that were in South America. 2 in Chile, 1 in Asunción in Paraguay, and 2 in Buenos Aires and 1 in Rio. So really kind of all over South America. And it seems like South America is providing a very rich platform for you to evolve the practice, and especially these concepts that you're talking about. And I'm wondering if you find that to be the case, that there's something specific to practicing in South America, or at least out of the confines of Spain, that's giving you a platform to explore these new concepts in your buildings.
Yes, that's true. It's during the last 10 years, more or less, that I've been teaching and lecturing in South America, and I have had these opportunities in different competitions or direct commissions. But I think that what we can learn from South America is that we have, how to say that, we're close to the things that they're being done. No? So it's easier so I'm very, well, Lorena knows that I love to make models, and to make models, I always say, like, more than to make models, I love to build models. No? So I have models that are 200 or 300 kilos weight because they're massive concrete, or they're like laying glass, whatever. No? So I like to build that things. And something that happens in the first project that I was doing when I finished the school is that I was feeling this distance between you as an architect and the architecture that you build. No? And since I began to teach there in South America, I had some opportunities to begin to work in this kind of like a more like installations, no? That I was able to be in contact with the construction, even doing that, even with the wheel, for example, that I was explaining, that it was amazing because we were only 4 days, 3 days and a half, more or less, building that. So it was really hard, only with the daylight, because it was a place without electricity, whatever, no? And then I think that this is a challenge, not in terms of time or in terms of capacity, is in terms of becoming more like, I don't know the word now in English, that ingenio is like that you need to think more, that you know that that's because I was showing that this drawing with the two scaffolding, with the crane, the pulley, and in order to have everybody working from the floor, not from the tool from 6 meters, no, from the floor, and then the wheel was necessary. So finally, the wheel was necessary to be built itself, because and then you could rotate the wheel, you can move up, and then you put the next ring, etc. No, so finally, there's something that I think is interesting, and I have had the opportunities, so the possibilities of doing that there, is that how the construction process is part of the design process. And I think that this, I suppose in the United States, but even in Europe, is very difficult. It's very difficult that the construction process became part of the design process. Okay, so the design process finished just before the construction, no? But there you have this opportunity, no, more or less, or even to have this kind of, I don't know, the arts and craft people, no, that you have close to you, etc. No, and even the specificity of every place, no. For example, the concrete and the bricks in Paraguay, or the concrete in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, or the wood in Chile, they have some specificities that are related to the, for example, in Chile, to the earthquakes or the capacity of building with wood, etc. No? That I think that give you a lot of reasons. No?
Yeah, if I can just like jump in, I want to kind of like highlight, because I know you very well, Josep, and probably you are the architect who I know that enjoys more while working, and that's why you are like constantly challenging yourself, is what Ben absolutely caught in your work, that you are not satisfied with doing great job or amazing projects, but you always want to push it further. And for me, one of the things that I can see in your work is that you are never satisfied, for the good and for the bad, because then no matter when I call you, you are always working, right? So, but working enthusiastically. And I think that is fantastic. You were talking about your duality before, and I love the question about the numbers. I think also your duality in your work is also a consequence of the clarity that you want to bring, especially tectonically. And that is something that you bring also to the work that you produce with your students. And I know that we are not talking a lot about your academic part, and I think it's a super interesting conversation as well. But I would like to also open it for questions. I don't know if anybody has questions, but it would be great to open up the conversation, if that is okay, Ben. I'm enjoying really much the conversation, but I think it would be great to open it.
I have a quick question. This is Nader speaking. I've seen the lecture twice now, listened to it twice. I enjoyed it both times. And it makes me think that many architects may become great designers, and yet not all of them are put in a position of teaching. And then there are many architects that teach, but they're not necessarily great teachers. But in your case, you seem to be an exemplary architect and teacher at the same time. I have not seen you teach in a classroom. I've seen you teach through this lecture alone. So, but beyond that, your buildings don't seem merely well designed, which they are, but they seem to have a pedagogical mission behind them. And what I'd like you to do is to help us better understand what exactly makes a building didactic, because I believe they are. And in some instances, you don't even need to explain them overly in an overly saturated way. They exude certain twists and logics and narratives that emanate from the detail all the way to the overall organization. But I wonder, how do you explain where there are pedagogical twists that are critical to you through the buildings that end up teaching us, and if that's the way you see it, and is there that link between what you do in studio at school and in the studio at your office? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, well, thank you very much for this. For this sentence, no, about the teaching and designing, but it's true. So I always say that I'm always trying to be really professional in the university. I'm very didactic in the office. No, so I'm trying to do both things at the same time in order that both things are the same thing. No, so depending how you see from this duality or this duality, but becoming the same thing. No, and it's something that happens. So when I finished the school, I began, well, since the last year that I was in the school, I was beginning to teach, and there's always this kind of question or this comment that some of the students sometimes they say, that they say, but I don't have the same capacity than another one, or I'm not able to do that, no, and that makes me think how to generate some kind of methodology that allow to the student to understand from the knowledge they can design in a didactic way, no? That they don't need to depend on the inspiration, no? All of the teachers we have had, sometimes some students saying me that I'm not inspired, no? And I remember always a sentence by Picasso, no? That saying that the art doesn't depend on the inspiration, it depends on the work. But at least if it depends on the inspiration, I should be working in that moment. No? So I think that this is what I'm trying always to provoke to myself, no? As Lorena was saying, to push myself, to do something that I haven't done before, and this is what I'm trying to always to talk with the students, and even to transmit to them that I am the parachute in some way, so that they can investigate. Because as a teacher, I'm the parachute. I'm pushing them in order to invest to research in that way, So how the things are didactic. So I think that they are didactic in the methodology. So in the way you understand the process to make it, no? And I think that this is when some project is didactic in some way, no? So, and even to make things like in Construmat, for example, in Construmat, if you want to talk about light materials, it's good that it's hanging, because and then is when this thing moves, no? And then you show the lightness. But this is too obvious in some way, no? But it's saying more things than this, no? And I like that the projects at the same time they have some kind of different layers, not as I was talking before, tectonic layers, but even different layers of lecture, no? In terms of somebody can understand really fast that, okay, they have done some fabric in order to have like a tent. Okay, this is a lecture, no? But you can read more things, no? So sometimes it depends on the deepness of the lecture that you want to have, no? But it's so that for me that the project is didactic when it's trying to explain you how it has been done, because it's the way you learn, no? So as a student, I always explain that you have to learn why and not what they have done, no? The architect that you observe, no? Is that why they have done that? Because if you answer the same answer, so if you repeat the answer, the project will be different. But if you repeat the solution, no, that's different. That's because I always say that as a teacher, we need to teach to cook, how to cook, not recipes, no. And this is again the same. It's about the methodology, no. You can be 1 year talking about tomatoes, and perhaps you have a better chef that if you are teaching all the year how to cook a paella, no? So it's more or less this, but I try to do the same in the office, even to myself. No?
That's great. maybe just as a final antidote for me, I also like to use recipes in my teaching. I like to think that I teach recipes, but personally, when I go home, I'm a terrible cook and I never follow recipes. So maybe there's a difference between what you teach and how you cook. Well, Lorena, should we take any questions from the audience? Does anybody want to chime in?
I think that would be fantastic, guys. Students, you're there. Don't be shy.
I have a question about what you said before, designing through construction. And I think that's a really inspiring way to think about construction and how it relates to design. But as students, I was wondering if you can expand like how students can think about design through construction without even the slightest experience in situations like that.
No, I didn't listen really well. Lorena, the question, because I didn't.
Yeah, it's actually it's a great question from one of my current students. So thank you though for the question. It's a fair question and I have my own answer, but I want Josep to answer this question. He's asking how students without really knowing a lot about construction can design through the lens of the construction or through the learning of construction.
Well, yeah, sorry, because it was like a intermittent a little bit, okay? Well, I think that, for example, more or less in some way, I answered before talking about models, no? When I was in the school, I was always trying to, instead of, as I said, making models, no, building models. I think that's a difference. So you make models when you use the same drawings that you're using for the plans, whatever, to make the model, okay? But when you build models, you need to make drawings to build the model. That is the difference, because when you build a model, that means that this is a construction. And when it's a construction, it's different. So that means that you are learning how to join things, how to glue, or formworks, yes, if it's concrete, whatever, no? But I think that there are different ways of learning from construction without making buildings. No? You can do a lot of things. Even the bed that you have behind you could be something that you design. No? So it's something that, or whatever, but there are a lot of things, but only even with the models, for example. No? So try to, next time that you make a model, try to think, instead of making, build it. And then that's really different, because the way of understanding is that when you build a model, you are not trying to explain what this building would be in a real scale. What you're trying to explain is how to build with that material. And that's different, because when you make a model, it's like only like a representation or an object in another scale of the real project in another scale. Okay, so when you build it is when you are trying to understand the construction as something that is informing you about how could be that space, but not in terms of atmosphere or in terms of I'm not talking about phenomenology. I'm talking about how this material working on that is helping you to redesign the project. For example, when I was doing one of these models that I'm talking about, very weight, one of these was ceramic model, and when you work with ceramic, you need to have first like a pre-mold. So first you have like a foam form, and then you make a pre-mold, and then you put that in the oven, etc. In order to take out the molds, you need to have that the walls are impossible to be vertical. You need to have at least 2 degrees of inclination. If not, it's impossible to take out the mold. Okay. And when I was making this this model, I was taking account that this project would be much better with this inclination, much better inside. Okay, because it's very different if you understand that there are 2 walls. It was a project, a competition for a museum, okay, in Germany, that I didn't win. But it was nice because instead of understanding that there is only 1 wall like this, okay, there are 2 walls like this. So the way of going from one side to the other side, so from one exhibition room to another room, instead of understanding that this is a side, because when you have a wall, you have a side. When you have a V shape, you have a corner. And it's different if you're crossing a corner that is coming from 10 meters to 2 meters, no? And you feel like a corner that it seems like in some moment will fall down. No? That when you have like a wall that even if it's very thin, finally what you have on the bottom part is a side, not a corner. And I was learning that could be a threshold of that could be one line instead of a threshold that could be 30 centimeters or 3 meters, could be a threshold, a line. And this is something that I learned building the model, not making the model, because if I would make the model, I would have done the model in the same way that the drawings was explaining.
As an extension of this question, may I ask you to elaborate on something you already said before? Somehow the shift from Europe to South America liberated you to do certain things that maybe were not institutionalized in the way that they're done in Europe. Help us understand better what happens in the context of a building industry that is overly developed on the one hand, let's say Europe, and then what happens in places that are, let's say, developing and therefore give space and tolerance for design development, meaning construction development as a part of the formative idea. I think that will also make possibly the link between the making of a model, the making up of a mock-up, and then the actual construction.
Yes, this is a great question, because it's true that, for example, when you work in a very developed industrialized societies, is that normally when you want to generate something new in terms of, for example, prefabrication or something industrialized, no, that you say, okay, I want to make this building like repeating some of these pieces, no. If you are trying to make some new piece, there's a lot of people telling you not to have these existing pieces because all the industry is developed. So you repeat this or this. You're not able to do that one. No? But when you are in a market that is beginning to work in that way, for example, in the case of Buenos Aires, no, for the project for the Torquato Di Tella University, it was an opportunity, no, to generate this. All the facade is industrialized in the same city in Buenos Aires. And it was an opportunity because they were a passion of this. So they were trying to do something like this as best as possible, because it was the first time that they were doing that. And they wanted to be the first ones that are doing that thing in Buenos Aires, that to do something that Jean Prouvé was doing during the 50s, no? But is that something that you work as a car and you put on the facade, no? Or, for example, one of the projects that I didn't show, which is in Buenos Aires, is a permanent pavilion next to the coast, which is like a nest and again a labyrinth, some kind of infinite stairs. And this is a project made by wood, and I was talking with what they say, la Cámara de Madereros, which is the wooden association of Argentina. And they were working and they were helping me a lot because there's no regulation about a structure and structure constructions in wood. So it's not allowed. It's not that there's not allowed to build with wood, okay? But there is no regulation. So if it's not regulation, even if you do it, it's very difficult to build some building with wooden construction. So I think that in that places you have a lot of opportunities, because in some way what you propose is an opportunity for some of the industries there to develop their own business.
That's great. Okay, well, we're coming up to 8:15 here. Lorena, should we take one more, or is this?
Yeah,
this
I
might be a
think one more
good,
could be great. For Josep and for myself, it's 2:13 a.m. and I'm sure he's gonna go back to the office right now. So I think one more could be great. We had a great conversation already, but if somebody has like a question, that would be fantastic.
I have a question, but it's more regarding how you're dealing with like the current circumstances as like someone who enjoys building models. This transition to a mostly digital, for us at least, a mostly digital studio, and I'm assuming that you have also similar restrictions where you can't necessarily build the way you were building before in model making. How are you transitioning to a digital realm, and how is that transition maybe changing the way you are thinking about the projects that you're dealing with?
Well, obviously there is a transition, and even, for example, as I was talking before, I'm teaching not only in Barcelona, but I'm teaching in the Universidad Torquato de Tella, for example, in Buenos Aires, and everything, well, a lot of things is digitalized. In fact, I teach there a unit that is called Barcelona Housing, and since the last 8 years, I've been doing some research about Barcelona, or collective house in Barcelona. And all the studies, even the last year, for example, all the students were working with the chamfers, because it's a very special condition in Barcelona. And all the work has been always digitalized by Grasshopper, etc. Rabbit. So it's something that it's being like in a transition in the office, becoming much more important in some way, but always understood as a tool. No? So it's not. So trying is like when I was studying, I was working by hand, no, so like drawing, no, and then we began with AutoCAD, no, at the 4th year, no, and I remember that the projects that they were clear that they were doing just what the AutoCAD was allowing them to do, okay, and then the other ones that they were using in a good way the AutoCAD to make better things or develop or more developed things that they were doing before, no. And I think that all the instruments, digital models, whatever, are able there, so are there to help you to develop better your thoughts, but they shouldn't be there to cut your thoughts. No? So in that way, you have to have the control of them and to know as much as possible all of them, but in order to help you. That's always what I think and I say with my students. No?
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's great. Well, let me say for myself, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Josep, and thank you for your generosity and your time. And I know I speak on behalf of everybody else. It was a very enjoyable experience, and I look forward to meeting you in person one day.
I hope it. And thanks a lot again to Adair, Ben, Lorena. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all for
Josep.
organizing this.
Yeah, thank you everybody to join us in the Q&A. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Good night.